And I just want to share a little of my background and just what Christ really means to me and my family. I'm from a difficult background. I was brought up in a home where love was non-existent and where I was abused sexually and physically by my own father, and was beaten senseless almost every day, and spent lots of times visiting hospitals, having lacerations sutured and broken arms put into casts and so on. That went on for a number of years, and I grew up with a lot of bitterness and resentment and anger. And as I got older, if people talked about God to me, I'd rather hit them than talk to them about it, because I always said, if God was real, why did I suffer what I went through as a child? Because no child should suffer that. But it's only when I got older and started using alcohol as a crutch to block out the pain and the memories of the past. And through my drinking and through work indoors, I got involved with some rather unsavoury characters, and down through the years have done a lot of damage to a lot of people and hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt, really. But also hurt my family. My wife Lynn had to put up with a heck of a lot from me. Not the physical abuse, because I'd never done that, but mental abuse. And I neglected my family, really, which was nobody's fault other than mine. I was expelled from school at the age of 11 because I caned the headmaster, and I'd been caught playing truant with a couple of other guys and frog marched back and refused to have the cane. But then the truant officer grabbed my wrist and held my hand out, so I left it there. And when the cane came down, I snatched it, snapped it in half, and hit the headmaster across the face with it. And I was expelled. I don't know why, but I was expelled. And if I'm honest, that's probably the first time I ever praised God, even though I didn't have that relationship with God. But I was expelled and didn't have to go to school again. But I ended up being put in an approved school where I was for 4 years. And that was a pretty brutal regime, and a lot of abuse in that place. And I just continued to become angry and resent people in a position of authority, and would do anything and not to do what people instructed me to do. And I continued that when I came out, and got myself in all kinds of scrapes, fighting. I loved nothing more than getting drunk and beating people senseless. But, you know, it reached a point where I met Lynn and married Lynn, and I still use drink as an excuse to justify my behaviour, and still use the past to justify my drinking. And, you know, hurt Lynn in a lot of times, just through the mental abuse which I heaped upon her, and the uncertainty and instability that I created in the family home. When I was in my late 20s, 30-ish, I was working for American company Coca-Cola at the time, and it was my brother-in-law, who my sister-in-law had asked if I could give a job to, who saw the extent of my problem, because I always had bottles of whiskey in the office desk and would drink it during the day. And Alan saw the extent of the problem, and Alan was a born-again Christian, and in my opinion was one of them idiots who went to church twice on a Sunday and praised God and jumped up and down with their arms in the air. And I considered to be one of life's losers, really, to be having to rely on God to get them through their lives. And he was the one who gave me the contact to the Steros Foundation, who I now work with. And I just ignored the number for a while, but it got to the point where I was on the verge of losing my wife. I'd lost my job, and I was going to lose my children if I continued down the path I was going. I tried AA and everything, but nothing worked. And eventually I looked at the phone number and contacted a guy called Lawrence, who was the worker for Steros, in the UK at the time, and I met with him and was honest and said, I'm not interested in this God side of it. I've got a problem with drink and violence, just deal with that. But Lawrence was honest and said that he couldn't do anything unless God was at the centre of it all. And I accepted that, respected his beliefs. And I arranged to see him on a regular basis, quite often. Wouldn't turn up, I'd be out when they were due to visit, and would have any kind of excuse. But it was one day when I'd been out drinking and got home in a state again, and Lynn was mad at me, and we argued, and I stormed out of the house and jumped in my car, and unfortunately I felt at the time the police were coming down the main road at the same time and saw this car come out and put the blue lights on, and I took them on a chase around the streets of Falmouth, and eventually it did pull up outside my own house, and all these police officers came with truncheons drawn and dragged me out of the car and put me in the back of a van. And I remember Lynn saying that he needs help, not a beating. And I think the response from one of the officers was, "You've been watching too much Starsky and Hutch. We don't do them kind of things." But they did. They beat me senseless in the back of a van and then at the station. And I was released and charged with drink driving. I was 5 times the legal limit, and I lost my licence, which at the time was like having your legs cut off. But in the end, it turned out to be a good thing, because I arranged to meet with Lawrence one day, and I knew that I needed to do something seriously about my drinking and my behaviour. And I told him I needed to know more of this God that he said could turn my life around. And we spoke at length, and then I made the decision that I was going to accept Christ into my life. And on that day, the 7th of February 1992, I got down on my knees and I just said a simple prayer because I didn't know how to pray. And I just asked that the Lord would come into my life and deliver me from my addictions and deliver me from the violence and the lifestyle that I led. And when I did that, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And from that moment on, I've never looked back. I went home that day and told Lynn that I'd become a born-again Christian and I had a Bible and I was going to be reading the Bible and going to church. And she sort of laughed and said, "I'll believe it when I see it." But 5 months after I became a Christian, Lynn became a Christian. And then both our children at the age of 7 became Christians. And, you know, we've been blessed that God has kept us because I stepped out in faith to work for God in the ministry of Starus. And I've been doing the work now for 30 years. And it's been a great blessing to be able to serve God. It's been difficult at times. And there's been times of doubt and uncertainty. But I know that if I hadn't have made the decision to become a believer and give my life over to Christ, I'd have been dead many years ago. Somebody would have killed me, or I would have been in prison because I'd have probably killed somebody else. And we've never looked back. We've had difficult times. I suffered a breakdown around 20 years ago, and Lynn says I lost the plot, and I just wasn't right with God, and was very suicidal, drove about all the time thinking about swinging my car into a bridge parapet or going on the motorway bridge and considering throwing myself over. And even at times sitting in the pitch black at Saddleworth Moors, walking out into the middle of a moor, sitting down and just asking God to let me die. But thankfully that didn't happen, and God once again became the most important person in my life. I began to recover from a breakdown and began to get myself right with God again. And again, since then, I've never looked back. We've gone through illness in the family. We've gone through deaths in the family. Lynn herself has gone through illness and was a difficult time for us, an uncertain time. But God has kept us, and God has brought us through all things. And, you know, whatever I do in life, I could never repay God for what he's done for me. Not only did he transform my life, not only did he respond when I cried out to him, but he began a work in me that I never believed was possible. He enabled me to deal with all the hurt and the baggage that I was carrying around. And, I never dealt with that until I was 40-year-old, before I was even able to talk about the abuse. But now, when I talked about it, when I got help with the issues that I'd gone through, and when I was released from the bondage to those issues, then I was set free again. And, it's the best decision I've ever made in my life to become a Christian. It's not anybody who's soft or a wimp who's a Christian, because I work in the prisons with murderers, with sex offenders, with organised crime, criminals, and all kinds of other prisoners who've done some pretty horrific things. And I've been privileged down through the years to see many people become a believer and be set free. Some of the prisoners I'm working with, I'll continue to work with upon release. Some of those I did work with in prison and were released, I'm still working with, and they're still going on well with God. And that's all I want to do. I want to serve God. I want to share the gospel, because it's the gospel and the life and the death and the resurrection of Christ, which is what makes the difference. It's not me. It's nobody else but God alone who can transform us. Yes, we can make changes in our lives, but total transformation begins with accepting Christ as Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Like I say, I've been in this church 32 years. I've been through the ups and downs of the church, seen the changes, and it's still home to me, and always will be. And being in this church amongst a family of believers, or a family who are friends, is something which is amazing. And I'd recommend it to anybody who might be on the verge of considering giving their life to Christ, but somebody who might be going through difficulties in their life. Turn to God. Turn to God, because it's him that makes the difference. There are people who will reach out and help you. We can't do it without God, because God is the one who begins to change us from the inside out and enables us to become the person he designed us to be.